everybody. We are up to a little past page 800 in Infinite Jest, and so we're here to talk about what's going on. Well, we'll do predictions at the end.
Okay.
Because we're starting to have some predictions about what's going to happen, like how things are going to come together.
Yeah, the book will end.
Yes, it will. So let's start with the conversation we had a few nights ago. We were trying to get everything straight about the two sides. We were trying to figure out like who's actually trying to do what and what their motivations are. So they're both trying to get the master tape.
Right.
The master cassette. It turns out that we do know Marath is a double agent or maybe a quadruple agent. So he has told Steeply about the plans.
Right.
The AFR is trying to get the cassette so that they can use it as a weapon in order to get kicked out of Onan because they wanted to secede, but Ottawa wouldn't let them.
Yeah.
Like, it didn't really work as a piece of storytelling that would be their motivation.
Right, but it's sort of like in history, like if you hear about like one country revealing secret cables that were sent about another country and it causes, a reorder.
So,
I mean, it is sort of a weak point. There's so many different motives, and I'm not even sure what Steeply's motive is.
Right. Well, it's his job. He's a spy, whereas Marath has a motivation, something to do with his wife. He really just cares about his wife.
Yeah. Well, part of what's interesting about that is they don't seem to have like a great relationship. It's not a bad relationship.
Yeah, he and his wife, right.
Yeah. And it's something that he makes a lot in this reading about how this is what I chose, right? I actively chose to be with her and I chose this situation.
He's very devoted to her.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we got to that, and then we were also talking about the meta moments in which David Foster Wallace seems possibly to be commenting on the novel through talking about himself's movies.
Well, there are passages where different people are talking about the movies, and one of the passages is Hal watching one of the movies and thinking about how himself worked so hard to avoid falling into genre that it actually came full circle all the way around, and he fell into genre. So there's kind of this version of the anxiety of influence going on for the creator in this story. I thought a lot about James Joyce's Ulysses with this, right? And, Joyce is trying to, like, do new things with the novel. And I think that David Foster Wallace is trying to do new things with the novel, but then falls into old things.
I mean, how could you possibly do something totally new with the novel? The novel's been around for hundreds of years. Okay, so I can even think of some postmodern writers like Kathy Acker, who's doing something completely different, but it's unreadable, honestly, a lot of it. Well, I mean, you could argue that parts of this are unreadable as well.
Well, and that's the complaint about Moby Dick, right? And Melville tried to just blow up the genre when he was doing that.
But Moby Dick's not unreadable.
In a different way it is, right? It's so fragmented.
It's not really fragmented, though. It's just alternating back and forth between those, like, weird, poetic, scientific passages about whales and then the story of the ship. But it's not really it's not fragmented like this is, or like Ulysses is. But of course, that came first. So I guess, I'm sure that was very radical at the time. So this is part of the problem is, like, there are still constraints. There are certain constraints you can't get past. Like, it's pages between two covers.
But that's the footnotes. Right, the footnotes allow you to escape that.
Break out of that, but it can't be infinite. It can't go on forever.
He should have written video games.
Because they can go on forever. They can just keep looping and looping and looping.
Well, and you can drop out of the linear page by page.
Yeah.
Which is ironic considering how much this is sort of an anti-video thing.
Well, and we talked about how ironic it is that we're making videos about this book.
Right. Hopefully this video won't kill you.
Okay, so I don't know. We lost track of where we were here.
Well, just the meta moments in the novel, right? There are also moments where Joelle talks about her first recognition that himself was actually, his movies looked really chaotic, but there were like 3 frames in one of the movies where she realized there was something genius going on. And
Three frames.
Right. And she wasn't even sure if he knew what he was doing consciously, but he did it. And so it's this beginning sense of sort of what the artist does and how artists work. Right. And that's kind of a cool thing for David Foster Wallace to be thinking about.
Right. So, I mean, everything that's said about the artistry of the films, you can't help but read it as being also about the artistry of the novel.
Right. Right. And then, a big part of these pages is Mario. I have this note. He's like this eyeball, right? He keeps reminding me of that Emerson quotation. And he's just there taking things in. And he doesn't judge. He's just kind of a lens for the action.
Well, okay, we'll get to Mario when we get to the predictions. Right. I was also going to say, in terms of meta moments, that there was that passage where Mario is having a heartfelt conversation with his mother, trying to get her to explain to him how you can tell if someone is sad. As I was reading that, I just thought it was kind of heartbreaking because it made me wonder whether that was how David Foster Wallace felt. Like, he was sad, but nobody could identify him as being sad. And if only someone could have explained to other people what it looks like for someone to be sad, maybe somebody would have understood that he was sad. I mean, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it's really, again, like once you know the tragedy of this author ending his life, it's hard not to read the whole novel through that lens at times also.
So one of the things that kind of clicked for me, and I'm hoping that this will become more complicated, is there's a quick line about how himself says he could never quite understand his two normal sons, which is kind of a rough line. But then there's this thing like somehow he and Mario did connect. And I'm waiting to see how that plays out.
Mario is definitely an important character. He's the most perceptive one. He's the one who raises the questions that everybody else is avoiding.
Right, and Hal says, "What should I do?" And Mario says, "You've already done it."
Yeah. You were observing that there's a whole series of intimate conversations in this section of the novel.
Yeah, it's just pairs of people talking, and they're saying really revealing personal things in most cases, but also they're often just talking past each other.
Yeah. That's what Neil said.
Right, which I thought that was such a perceptive thing. So there are these deep things happening, but no one else is listening.
So, and then there's that Narcotics Anonymous meeting that Hal attempts to he drives way out to Wellesley Hills or something to go to this. He had to stop smoking pot because he's going to be tested. And he sort of got a reprieve, so he's got to really stay off the pot. And so he decides he's going to go to a Narcotics Anonymous meeting, and then he accidentally ends up at some other kind of meeting. But he knows he realizes he knows one of the guys there. And you saw that as maybe, so that's one of those intimate conversations that's happening. But
right, I mean, this guy was, I think, the brother of Oren's tennis.
Right, he was in Oren's group, right?
Right, and so this is a guy who was connected to an earlier generation, I guess, at the tennis academy, and peaked as a tennis player, as a business person, and seemingly even as an adult, and has now declined. And so when Hal sees that person, he's also seeing himself, in some way, because he just lost that tennis match. His future is kind of up in the air right now. And, the character's last name is Bane, right? So this is sort of the bane of Hal's existence in some way, right? And he's having to confront this, and he just doesn't know what to do.
Even as I'm listening to you say all this, I'm thinking David Foster Wallace. I mean, we've said before we think that Hal is kind of his stand-in, but, I wasn't thinking about that when I was reading the passage, but now I'm thinking he's worried that he, too, has peaked. And he's terrified of what's going to happen next. And of course,
he personally probably experienced it as a tennis player,
but also as a novelist.
Right. But what I'm saying is, like, it's one thing if, like, you have sort of one thing in your life and you sort of like, have I peaked or not? He's experienced already what it's like to be past your peak.
Yeah. And he's trying this really hard thing, which is to write this novel, this like huge experimental novel, and he must be extremely anxious about how it's going to turn out and how it's going to be received, and are people going to understand what he was doing? Yeah, so as you're talking about Hal that way,
You're starting to sound kind of sympathetic.
yeah. Okay, so predictions. Let's talk about the predictions. So my prediction, one of the things that I noticed, I mean, it's not a big prediction, it's obviously dropped in there for you to notice, is that there is the FLQ, I think they're called, has identified the fact that there is a Samizdat remedy cassette. In other words, there's some cassette out there that you can watch that will save you from the dangerous cassette. And so
this is a Narcan cassette.
I guess, yeah. And so that's obviously got to come back in some way. Somehow somebody's going to find that cassette, and there's going to be a race to somebody's going to be watching the bad cassette, and somebody's going to be racing to get the remedy cassette to them.
If this is badly written, this will be one of the cassettes that Marath saw on the shelf at Ennett House. There are a bunch of unlabeled cassettes.
You mean one of the remedy cassette will be one of those?
Right, would be at the recovery house.
Well, I was thinking the dangerous cassette is in there. Well, that's what he's looking for.
Right.
He's got to find the master cassette, though. That's the problem.
Right.
Like, they've already found copies of the cassette and shown it to some poor volunteer who succumbed to it, or a couple of guys, I think. So that what they need is the master. And that, it seems unlikely that that's on the shelf at Ennett House, the master cassette. But it does seem possible that Hal has it in that box of his father's cassettes. So that's where Blood Sister is, the movie that we get the whole plot as he and his friends are watching the movie. Yeah. And that goes back to what you were saying about the genre. Like, we can see how the genre is cycling back around.
Well, there was a video that got referred to in a strange way, and it's called, like, Basic Civics. There was a moment where I thought, wow, is that it? And then is he just saying, like, civic behavior? And is that, like, what really he's after here? Like, is that part of Marath and, like, choosing and loyalty and things like that? Is it just, like, elemental things like that?
Okay, so it's at the end of the scene where they're watching Blood Sister together. It says, Hal holds up a hand for the kids to hang on, flipping through cartridge cases to see whether low-temperature civics is up here. All the cases are clearly labeled. Break.
Right. Dun, 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 dun.
All the cases are clearly labeled. I don't really know what that means, but it means something.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does seem like if anybody has the master cassette, Hal has it in this bunch of cassettes that he's working his way through. We have other predictions. You said something about Lenz.
Yeah, Lenz is out there. And one of the really interesting things is Lenz hears Tony Krause, who's blocks away. There's an echo from that. And so I'm wondering why those narratives have to cross right now. Something is getting set up for later.
Purse snatches.
Yeah.
Tony Krause purse snatches from
Kate and Ruth.
Okay, so those things are happening simultaneously, and we don't know why yet.
Right, which little Joycean moment.
But we know that we're pretty sure that Lenz is coming back.
Right.
And also, we're assuming that probably the end of the novel is going to take us back to the first scene, because the opening scene at the University of Arizona, where Hal kind of has his breakdown, happened after all of these things. Like, we're being driven back to that moment.
Right.
So we're assuming that's going to happen.
Right, and part of the stress of that scene is the THC withdrawal. Right, that's on his mind during that scene.
So that's got to be happening soon.
Yeah.
There's the big Whataburger.
Right. He goes there before Whataburger. It's sort of on the same trip. He goes to Arizona
before Whataburger. Oh, yeah. So it's coming up soon. Yeah. Okay. And then you had a really interesting take on Mario, which maybe is too... maybe it's too... Like, speaking...
Too easy?
Well, speaking of genre, like, you're trying to break the bounds, and then you just end up circling back around to this such a common trope. It's like the most common trope out there.
Well, I mean, Mario is this really soulful character, and he's sort of at once wise and innocent and he's very difficult for people to understand. So there's that part of his personality, which is like really charming and interesting. But then there's also the fact that he is walking around with this pole that he leans on. It seems like he is ripe for crucifixion or self-sacrifice. And the issue then is sort of for whom and how and...
For Hal. It has to be for Hal. If that's where this is going, the most logical person for him to sacrifice for would be Hal. And partly because Hal is our protagonist.
Yeah.
And so Hal would be saved by Mario. Presumably, Mario stepping in to watch the cassette and saving Hal from seeing it. Mm-hmm. That remains to be seen. Whether David Foster Wallace ended up using the Christ figure in the end of this novel, which, I don't know, that'd be kind of surprising. But as you were saying it, I was like, yeah, you can't really ignore that his character and also that contraption that he's carrying around with him all the time.
Right, and we didn't even get into the whole thing about Madam Psychosis being a pun on metempsychosis.
Oh, yes, yeah.
The transmigration of souls, and so maybe Mario's connected to that. Which actually gets talked about in here about mothers causing death and birth, and they dote on their children because they feel guilty for having killed them in a previous life.
Where did that come up?
It's in the book somewhere.
I missed that, but I'm missing a lot. I understand why you might have to read this more than once, although I'm not going to do that. Mm-hmm. Anytime you read a difficult book the first time through, you're just learning how to read it. Mm-hmm. And then you would have to go back later and reread it to, like, with the knowledge that you get from the first reading to understand what the heck is going on.
Sure.
Yeah. And you just told me yesterday you read Ulysses 4 times.
It's a good book.
Okay, I've only read it once, and I know I would get something out of reading it again, but there's a lot of stuff to read out there.
It's true.
So, okay, we are on our way to page 900, after which we will be on our way to the end of the novel. So we've got 2 more videos coming when we get there. And in the meantime, there will be another regular episode of Better Book Clubs coming next weekend. See you then.